Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Peregrine Prude. This is where I just go through some of the books that I have read in the past and some that I will read in the future, and I talk about what I think about them, basically comments, critiques, praise. I'll go off on many bunny trails, I'm sure. Just kind of talking about the passages that I underline as I read them, and also the notes that I often write in the margins. Today, we're going to look at a book entitled The Emperor's Handbook. It's better known as the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor in the 2nd century AD. He was famously portrayed in the movie The Gladiator, pretty accurately, I would say. He was also a stoic philosopher, and in his writings, in this book of the Meditations, he emphasizes being prepared for suffering and death, and how to reconcile your will to your fate. He also mentions people that he has come across in his life and things that he praises and things that are noteworthy and praiseworthy about them. And a lot of it is just a journal for himself. You can often detect he's just making notes for himself. He's often reprimanding himself for acting against what he believes to be his better nature. According to Wikipedia, he wrote Meditations roughly from Anno Domini 161 to 180. And now, as a Christian, I think there are many praiseworthy things within the Stoic philosophy, as far as fulfilling your duty. Now, duty alone is not good, but loving duty with love. So that jives with Christianity very well. Also, fortifying yourself and preparing yourself for suffering and eventually for at least physical death. That is in line with Christian doctrine and teaching as well. So whereas a lot of it, I would say Marcus Aurelius definitely was not a Christian. He believed in, he references the old gods, not by name, but in the plural. So I would say he's definitely a classicist, as far as he was a polytheist in that regard. So we, as Christians, we have to take everything he says with a grain of salt. But still, there's much within the Meditations for Christian edification. So let's dig into it. There are a couple quotes I'd like to read you just from the introduction by the two contemporary authors who did this translation of the Meditations. They are C. Scott Hicks and David V. Hicks. They are brothers, and so I think there's a couple interesting things within their introduction to this translation. First, our freedom begins in our thinking, not in our doing. When we control what we think and desire, only then are we free. Those who fail to grasp this live in chains. They may be politically free to say or do what they like, but their thoughts and desires are out of their control. Or more precisely, their irrational and antisocial thoughts and desires enslave them. What a conviction that is. we are still extremely politically free, especially in the West, especially in the USA, compared to people over the centuries, over the millennia. But as politically free as we are, we often become enslaved and entrapped within our passions. We don't have true freedom of the mind. That's to say, our freedom is not tempered by discipline. We simply indulge in license, and we do not recognize that we need to be disciplined, spiritually disciplined, so that we don't become slaves to ourselves. Whenever G.K. Chesterton has a quote, this is not verbatim by any means, but he says, whenever a person doesn't believe in God, that simply opens the door to believing in anything. And that's what we do. And we mostly believe in ourselves as our own gods. Going along with this, John Adams' famous quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." I just went for a 4-mile run, so I'm a little sweat got in my eyes, so my eyes are a little bit dry and red. So I think this goes in line with this quote from the introduction. Now, you could make the argument, and I often do, that every single person is a moral and religious person. It's just a matter of what are the morals and what is the religion. Everybody has some fundamental, unprovable, bedrock presupposition that they cannot. That's the bedrock of their belief. Whether that be just trusting your 5 senses with empiricism. Scientists, they got to trust their 5 senses, right? We don't really have any good reason to say that that's valid. We trust them and we believe that this is reality. I believe that's true. We should trust our 5 senses. We should believe that this is real, that this is real. All that's around us that God has made is real. I believe those are good assumptions, but nevertheless, they are assumptions. They are the presuppositional bedrock that we operate out of. And there are others like that. So everybody believes in something. Everybody is religious at some point. And I would say the farther a person's morality and religious gets away from God's truth, from what God wants it to be, as revealed in His Word, the worse those morals and the religion becomes by the standard of God's Word. The next text from the introduction. Is it not ironic that the type of freedom Marcus thought unachievable, political freedom, we now regard as the only freedom possible, while the freedom of mind that Marcus prized so highly now seems unattainable? In the world after Darwin, Marx, and Freud, Marcus forces us to re-examine our concept of freedom and to ask ourselves how much political freedoms are worth if we are the slaves of false opinion and harmful desire. Are we really free in doing if we are not free in our thinking? No, we're not. Freedom starts in the mind. A prisoner can be in solitary confinement and he can still be more free than some playboy or debutante in a big city doing whatever they think they want to do and living it up in some lascivious lifestyle because they can't control themselves. But a person in prison, it's possible that they can control themselves. They can't control their reactions. Maybe they can't control their environment, but they can control themselves. I think that Marcus does a good job throughout these meditations that we'll see later in showing how, and I think the Bible does the same thing as well, showing how fate, destiny, and free will are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they work together so well. And what Marcus is trying to get at is how we can align our free will with our destiny. And the destiny that he often references is suffering and eventual death. Alright, now we're going to get into the thick of it just a little bit. This is in Book 1 from Meditations. Here he's referencing a person that he's known in his life named Maximus. Wouldn't that be kind of cool if it was General Maximus from the movie? Probably not, but still, it's a person named Maximus. Nothing surprised or frightened him, and he never seemed to be in a hurry or slow to accomplish a task. He's speaking about this was a characteristic of his friend Maximus, a praiseworthy characteristic. Never seemed to be in a hurry or slow to accomplish a task. He had a nice pace. He had a pace that seemed to be informed by wisdom and experience. There's an old Latin maxim, festina lente, which translates basically into "hurry up slowly," or go slowly with haste. It's kind of an oxymoron, but not really. It seems like a contradiction, an oxymoron, but it's not really. It carries the idea of like go as fast as you can without being reckless. And actually, Emperor Caesar Augustus used to tell his troops, especially the vanguard of his troops, this whenever they would go and scout out enemy territory. Go with speed. Don't be lazy, but be careful. Don't go so fast that you're reckless. Don't go so slow that you're lazy. It's a good balance. Festina lente. In Book 2 now. Because you have chosen not to respect yourself, you have made your happiness subject to the opinions of others. You have made your happiness subject to the opinions others have of you. This is so apt for all people in all times, but I have to pick a little bit on Generation Z and the Millennials. Now, I am very happy, and I hold this with pride, I think, virtuous pride, that I was born the last year of Generation X, 1981. And I hold on to that fast, because I do not want to be grouped in with the Millennials. Many wonderful, great Millennials, many wonderful, great Gen Zs. No disrespect. But taken as a whole, there is something a little bit hypersensitive about those two generations as a whole, especially Gen Zs. But Millennials, they've got their problems too. Of course, Generation X, every generation has a problem. But don't let your happiness be subject to the opinions others have of you. Well, man, of course. Because why should we overly care about what other people think about us? Now, as a Christian, I should have a proper concern about what people think of me as far as my Christian testimony. That goes without saying. But when it comes to things outside of the Christian testimony, when it comes to my Christian testimony and people don't like that, that's not on me, and I should not care about that. I should not be overly concerned or worried about that. And if God be for us, who can be against us, right? And with social media in abundance now, young people especially, they tend to think too much about what others think of them. I mean, that is kind of a teenage thing for every generation, but it's something to keep in mind for everyone. Were you to live 3,000 years, or even 30,000, remember that a man can lose only the life he is living, and he can live no other life than the one he loses. Whether he lives a long time or a short time amounts to the same thing, for the present moment is of equal duration for everyone, and that is all any man possesses. Wow, this is just packed. First of all, even though I understand the sentiment when people say he or she died too young, I sympathize with that. I understand where they're coming from, but it's completely wrong. Everybody lives a full life. Whether you live 1 minute or you live 130 years, or in what's his name? Methuselah's case, 969 years. Everybody lives a full life. I often got to think in my head, Medusa, Methuselah. It's always, like, I always get those new two names. It's not Medusa. Methuselah was Noah's dad, I think, right? All right. Maybe not Noah's dad. I don't know. Have to check me on that later. But everybody lives the time, the duration that God has allotted. I think that's something important to keep in mind, especially whenever you lose a loved one, especially if they're young. It hurts, but may this truth just perhaps alleviate the pain a little bit. We're recognizing that even though they might have died young, they lived a full life for them. And also, he says, for the present moment is of equal duration for everyone, and that is all any man possesses. All we can live, the only place we can live is right now. We cannot live in the past. We cannot live in the future. These are illusions, really. They're just illusions. The past, it happened. We should learn from it. The future, it will happen. We should plan for it. But we can't live in either one of these places. We can only live and react and act right now. This is the only time that we can actually live, is now. Now. So we got to keep that in mind. A lot of people, they live in the past and they regret, or they live in the past because the past was better in some ways and they want to return to the past. But for me, regret is to the past what worry is to the future. Right? Worry, if you're worried about the future, that's basically telling God that He's not in control. That I don't trust you to guide things, situations, me, where I need to go. Regret is the exact same thing, but with reference to the past. It's telling God, I don't trust you that things went the way that they should have gone. So don't have regrets. Yeah, you can look back at your mistakes and say that was a mistake, but don't regret it. Regret is a step too far. Same thing with worry. Concern. Have care. Have proper concern. Adapt now so that you can address those concerns and cares. But don't worry. Worry is a step too far. Book 4. It doesn't approach... Wait a minute. Is this what I wanted to do? Okay, yeah, it is. It doesn't approach an object with prejudice or preconception, but handles each, talking about a person's sovereign spirit within themselves, a stoic, basically, a good stoic, sovereign spirit. It doesn't approach an object with prejudice or preconception, but handles each thing dispassionately before embracing it, if necessary, finds advantage in what opposes it, like jujitsu, basically. It is like fire in this regard. Whereas a feeble flame might suffocate under a pile of dry sticks, a robust flame consumes everything it touches. The more objects of any kind heaped on it, the higher it rises, the hotter it burns. So if we have such a spirit within us, a sovereign spirit, he's referencing the sovereign spirit of a Stoic. However, this could more aptly be applied to the sovereign spirit of God, the Holy Spirit that lives within each of us who believe in him. And this kind of puts me in mind of Hebrews 12 verses 27 through 29, which say, this phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. He is the consuming fire within us, and all things that come within our purview can be consumed by his spirit, his burning spirit within us. And also the things that are shaken up so that the bad things fall out. It's also the idea of the being tempered with fire, where the dross rises out of the impurities. The dross rises out of the gold or the silver, to where all that's left is the purified, the rarefied, pure substance. Now, here he's kind of talking about meditations, where we can just kind of enter into ourselves at needed times throughout our lives. Whenever things are getting way too out of hand and chaotic, we can just kind of take these mini inner vacations or meditations. He says, take this vacation as often as you like, and so charge your spirit. But do not prolong these meditative moments beyond what is necessary to send you back to your work free of anxiety and full of vigor and good cheer. So he's talking about taking these momentary inner meditative vacations. You don't have to go to Florida, you don't have to go to Europe, you don't have to go to California to take a vacation. You just take a vacation anytime you like right here. But he exhorts people not to extend it. Don't be spaced out for too long, or you might miss something that you need to pick up on that's around you. And for the Christian, of course, this is the prayer life, right? This is prayer. We can access and enter God's throne room through prayer at any time we like. They don't. People say, "Oh, no prayer in schools." You don't even know that I'm praying. I mean, they can never regulate that, because I could just be taking a test, and between questions 2 and 3, I could have said a silent prayer in my head. So they can never get rid of prayer in schools. That's not a danger at all. It's just a matter of, are they going to get rid of communal prayer? I think they pretty much already have done that, except for certain student groups. Okay, next. Too far. By coming together in the right way, all the individual stones become one. Just as the universe is the coming together of all objects in it, So destiny is the one compelling and inescapable logic to which every cause contributes. So here he has this is basically a syllogism for design and destiny. Everything is made of something, right? Like a tower is made of all the individual stones that come together to make the one tower, the one stone as whatever's being built. The universe is the universe by virtue that it encompasses all the physical elements within it. And so he says, destiny, by the inescapable logic, destiny is that which all causes push towards. I mean, it's not argument proof, but it's a good syllogism for destiny. Is it not shameful when ignorance and vanity outperform wisdom? How guilty I am of this. Ignorance and vanity. You know, ignorance and vanity, at first consideration, they seem like opposites, but they always go hand in hand. Maybe not always, but they often go hand in hand. I mean, if you're vain, then that means that you're overly confident, and that means you don't really know as much as you should, because if you really truly had a lot of knowledge, you would not be vain. I have a Latin proverb tattoo on my back. It's I can always say this, but now that I'm on video, I can't remember it. It's I have a tattoo. I can't remember it right now. Oh, jeez. Got it. Minu sepe peke siskias quadnescias. I can always come up with that, but I couldn't right now. What it means is lest you would err if you knew how much you did not know. I got that on my back because it's so true. It's basically saying, don't let your ignorance and vanity outperform wisdom. Someone wrongs me. Why do I care? That's his business. His inclinations and actions are up to him. I care only about what the universal nature wills for me, and I do what my own nature wills. This reminds me of a time when I lived in Korea teaching English for 7 years, and I came home to Indiana 3 times during those 7 years. And during one of those times, while I was home, I was running down the road. I like to run, to jog. And a couple of young guys in I think it was a T-top Firebird or Camaro maybe. They threw a half-empty styrofoam or paper cup of something on me. And in that moment, my reaction was to just do something. Give them the middle finger or something, or, like I was just like, but then when I turned around and they were down the road, and I was still burning inside with anger, but I was waved at them. I did that. And what helped me to not burn with rage for hours after that was the thought that I deserve hell. That's what I deserve. Because of my sins, and because God is a holy God, a righteous, a wrathful God, in part, that I deserve hell, eternity in hell. And if that's what I deserve, then getting a cup of whatever thrown at me in disrespect by a couple dudes driving down the road, what is that? Who cares? Right? So that perspective helped me to not burn with rage. And I was actually quite happy with how I handled that because of where my mind went in that moment. So, right? Someone wrongs me, why should I care? That's his business. His inclinations and actions are up to him. How I react, now that's up to me. We are not controlled by our environment. Our environment affects us, but we are not controlled by it. Here's a good one from Book 6. Do your duty, and never mind whether you are shivering or warm, sleeping on your feet or in your bed, hearing yourself slandered or praised, dying or doing something else. Yes, even dying is an act of life, and should be done, like everything else, to the best of your abilities. That's kind of what life is about, right? It's kind of preparing, and wisdom is about preparing yourself for a good death, preparing yourself for death, and to die with grace if you're in a position where other people are around, and to die, to prepare yourself for death, and then eventually to die, so that you'll have pleased God in that preparation and in that death. Here's one. The world is either a mindless binding and loosing of atoms, or the unity and order of providence. If I accept the first scenario, why am I so eager to prolong my days in a body formed by accident and in a world governed by chance? What is the point and purpose of living in such a world other than someday to become dust? And why should even that consideration bother me? All considerations will soon be atomized anyway. But if the other scenario is true, I worship calmly and confidently the power that rules. And this recalls something a conclusion I came to several years ago. That there is either the God of the Bible and all that entails, His word has spoken to man, and all that He is. There is either that is the truth, or there is Albert Camus, the French philosopher's notion of absurdity. It's either God is in control of everything, or all existence is absurd, and it's just chaos and randomness. But when you look around, you don't have to live very long or think about it very long to realize that it's not absurdity. Things could not have just come by random chance over time. It's too well tuned. However, if pressed, then Camus' concept of the absurdity of life and existence is the second most reasonable, rational option behind, way far behind, a very distant second behind God's truth as revealed in the Bible. For vanity is the supreme sophist, and when you flatter yourself that you are engaged in some good or worthy enterprise, then you are most easily deceived. We saw this with the Pharisees, right? They were so self-righteous. They thought they were engaged in a good and worthy enterprise of upholding the law strictly without any grace. and yet how deceived they were. We see this with so many politicians these days, so many pastors these days, so many people who are in positions to do so much good, and they do a lot of good, but they also do a lot of doo-doo sometimes if they're not watching over themselves and in communion with God, and having people around them who keep them accountable. It was so sad hearing about Ravi Zacharias, the famous Christian apologist. I mean, he was one of my heroes, and it's just so amazing to listen to the wisdom that would come out of him, and yet now knowing what he was up to on the side of his ministry, just heartbreaking. Does that mean that I should not watch old videos of his that do contain much wisdom? Should we, as Christians, boycott his I don't know if his ministry is still active or not. Should we boycott his ministry and his books and his YouTube or his videos? I don't think that's the right conclusion. I still think we can be edified by those good works that he did, but it's just sad in the grand scheme of things, and especially potentially in eternity for him. Just as circus games and other popular entertainments offer the same tedious scenes over and over, so it is with life. An appalling sameness, a tiresome round of cause and effect. When will it ever end? This is kind of Ecclesiastes in a nutshell. At least the majority of the book of Ecclesiastes in a nutshell. Of course, Ecclesiastes talks about how everything is meaningless. There's nothing new under the sun. Vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity of vanities. It's just it's a vapor, and it's gone. However, it's important to remember that in the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, that's the real point. That's the real point of Ecclesiastes. I think there's 12 books in Ecclesiastes, and 11 and a half of those books are quite depressing. It's like no matter whether you're poor or rich, or you're wise or not educated, or a hard worker or whatever, it's all meaningless. All of life is meaningless. But then at the end, like you've got what Douglas Wilson calls joy at the end of the tether in his short commentary on Ecclesiastes. I recommend that, by the way. Douglas Wilson, Joy at the End of the Tether. At the end of Ecclesiastes, it says, what is the whole point what is the whole point? To serve God and obey His commandments. And at the end, whenever we consider that gives meaning to the churning and the cycles of everything that was described in the first 11 and a half chapters. It's like that nugget gives meaning to the meaninglessness of the rest of it. Next passage here. The happiness of those who want to be popular depends on others. The happiness of those who seek pleasure fluctuates with moods outside their control, but the happiness of the wise grows out of their own free acts. Very good. Yeah, this is it's important to distinguish between happiness and joy, right? Happiness depends on what's happening. Joy is a deep, abiding hum within a Christian that is placed there by the Holy Spirit. And that joy transcends all of life. It transcends every situation, every circumstance. Now, but happiness is skin deep. It's surface level. It's the smile. You can have happiness and joy in tandem, but joy is there even whenever somebody can be depressed and still have that deep, abiding joy that is not manifest to anybody else, but it's still there for that person. And I think that's kind of what he gets at when he says, but the happiness of the wise grows out of their own free acts. I think that would be more akin to joy, whereas what other people think of you and see the pleasure seeking, that's all just mere surface happiness. Bear in mind that the measure of a man is the worth of the things he cares about. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. Take on life's tasks with the resolve of a soldier storming the breach. So what if you are lame and cannot scale the wall alone? Does your lameness prevent you from finding someone to help you? That's good. Don't be overly committed to independence, to living the life of a hermit. I mean, there is virtue in being self-sustaining to a degree, but don't take it to that extreme limit to where you're unwilling to ask for help when you need it. One of my best friends, he kind of reminds me of this. He recently started up a business, like a carpentry, handyman, mowing and lawn service business. And he didn't really know how to really take it to the next level. And so he reached out for help. And I applaud him for that, for asking out for help to friends who have more experience doing these kinds of things and getting a business up and running. I wasn't of much help, but other people were. And I'm thankful for that he reached out and that they were willing to help him out to get his business up and running. Look at the past with its endless succession of empires, and you see the future. The two are the same, since there is no way of escaping the changeless rhythm of the present. Study man for 40 years or for 10,000. It's all the same. What more can you expect to see? There, once again, kind of corroborating with Ecclesiastes, and there's nothing new under the sun. I want to contrast this. This is kind of the idea of historicism, that things that come around, they go around, like history repeats itself. And I also subscribe to that notion that history repeats itself because people are always the same. And people always react the same. Yeah, we learn, we develop technology, sure. Technology we've never had. We've gone to the moon, we fly across the world, we got computers and everything. But human nature doesn't change. And for that reason, history repeats itself. Now, I want to contrast that with Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies, Volume 1. He kind of takes this idea to task, and I want to give credit here, or I want to just present this counterpoint that I do not agree with. Karl Popper writes, in order to gain a better understanding of this out-and-out historicist attitude, and to analyze the opposite tendency inherent in Plato's belief that he could influence fate, I shall contrast historicism, as we find it in Plato, with a diametrically opposite approach, also to be found in Plato, which may be called the attitude of social engineering. The social engineer does not ask any questions about historical tendencies or the destiny of man. Yikes. He believes that man is the master of his own destiny, and that in accordance with our aims, we can influence or change the history of man, just as we have changed the face of the earth. He does not believe that these ends are imposed upon us by our historical background or by the trends of history, but rather that they are chosen or even created by ourselves, just as we create new thoughts or new works of art, or new houses or new machinery. As opposed to the historicist who believes that intelligent political action is possible only if the future course of history is first determined, the social engineer believes that a scientific basis of politics would be a very different thing. It would consist of the factual information necessary for the construction or alteration of social institutions in accordance with our wishes and aims. So it's the idea of basically engineering society according to the wishes and aims of the people in that society. How does that get us out of the cycles of history, though? I mean, isn't that what people have always done? Society has always been engineered in one way or another by certain groups of people. And how does this, I don't understand how this breaks us out of history repeats itself. And I made a comment in the margins here. For this to work, wishes and aims must be sterilized of human passion, emotion, and belief, which essentially means not human, right? And that's kind of AI, kind of going the direction of artificial intelligence, of computers computing models that we can base our decisions off of. It's just, and this is not breaking us out of any historical science cycle. It's the same thing over and over again. Oracles used to give people directions. So how is that the same? How is that different from a computer doing it, just in a less passion-filled way? It's not. History does repeat itself. We're going into a point in American society where we are going back to what was socially acceptable like 2,000 years ago in the Roman era, with the acceptance of homosexuality, the acceptance of so many things, the acceptance of, I believe what's coming is the acceptance of pedophilia. I mean, I know people say, oh, it's not going to happen. That's such a slippery slope argument. No way. You fearmonger. No. It will happen. It will happen. But by the time it's happening, it'll be decades down the road. And people that can remember that we're saying, oh, remember we told you this was going to happen. It's going to be so many decades ago that people aren't even going to care anymore. And that is the direction we're going. We're in a point where children, 3 and 4 year old children, can make a decision to change their sexuality. If a boy wants to become a girl, they can do that. And so if they can do that, if they can make that decision as a 3 or 4 year old, the next logical argument for proponents of the normalization of pedophilia is to say, well, they're able to make this decision. Why can't they make a decision about their sexual activity? That's where we're going. Back to the meditations. Pain is never unbearable or unending, so long as you are mindful of its limits and bridle your imagination. That's right. Fear and imagination within that fear are often what make pain and what make pain so much worse. I was down on my back about 3 or so years ago. I've never broken a bone. I've never had a twisted wrist or ankle. I've had like 4 stitches in my life, but nothing serious. So this was the first major physical setback that I had, and I was 37 or 37 and 38 when I was going through this. My lower back, so much pain. Oh, so much pain. Could not move an inch in bed. Could not do anything for like 5 or 6 weeks, and then it eventually took about 6 months to finally get back to normal. Normal's kind of relative, but for me especially. Nevertheless, but within that, what made my suffering so much worse was the thought that this was going to be my life now. I'm never going to be able to walk again. I'm never going to be able to hike in the woods, climb a mountain, go for a run down the road. And what really broke my heart was the fear that I would not be able to play with my son anymore. He was like 5, I think, at the time, and that scared me. And I didn't throw a pity party, but yet it still scared me, and it made my suffering so much worse, because that was the first time I'd experienced something like that, and I didn't know if I was going to come out of it. I did, thank God, but when you're in it, you don't know. There's always that fear that maybe this is me now. It is even possible to be godlike without being recognized for these divine attributes. I think sometimes the people that society views as nuts or crazy, they can be perhaps sometimes very close to God. And I was on a visa run one time in Fukuoka, Japan. I was only there for like a couple days. But while there, I was on the subway in Fukuoka, and there was this, by all considerations, homeless guy. Seemed a little bit wacky. People are keeping their distance from him. I felt uncomfortable by him. Seemed a few fries short of a Happy Meal. But he was singing. He was just there. He was happy. He was singing a song in Japan. I have no idea what he was singing about. But I just, maybe it was that I couldn't understand what he was saying or was singing. Maybe that was why I gave him such a gracious and a more thoughtful interpretation. But that experience kind of inspired this poem that I wrote, entitled "A Sane Man." We all sit, avoiding eye contact, determined strangers to remain that way. We focus on books, cell phones, backs of eyelids, or the deflection of looks. A foreigner moves his eyes, looks around as foreigners do, ignorant of the lay of the land in this intimacy of resignation. Subway train, Fukuoka, Japan. Then comes a man, hobble, hair lip, and crooked underbite. Sits down, claps his hands, sings a ditty to music in his head about heavenly things and traces left behind of the days when he wasn't the only one. You know, maybe he was singing a really, really vulgar song. Who knows? But that experience made me realize that, you know, there could be angels. There very likely are angels among us in disguise. And we need to be careful how we treat people. Just because they don't fit the norm doesn't mean that they cannot be messengers of God or filled with the Spirit. Here's another one. To live each day as if it were your last, without speeding up or slowing down or pretending to be other than what you are. This is perfection of character. To live every day as if it were your last. That is good. Remember that you don't lose any freedom by changing your mind and accepting the correction of someone who points out your error. After all, it's your initiative, it's your judgment, indeed your intelligence that makes that change and acceptance possible. That's very good. We should not be so stubborn that we're not going to recognize or accept it when we are clearly wrong. Matter of fact, I would argue that let's be stubborn enough to accept our errors, right? You could kind of spin it in that way. If you want to like cling to your stubbornness, and if you want to cling to your being right, well then be stubborn enough to point the finger at your own errors whenever somebody else points them out within you, so that you can change to continue to be right. If you want to still be stubborn about it, you can spin it that way. Modest in victory, graceful in defeat. Former Vice President Mike Pence exhibits these qualities. Now, I'm not a Trump hater. I'm not a Trump lover. I think he did some good things while he was president, but his personality, his character, lacking. And he is not modest in victory and graceful in defeat. I just put, you see there, Pence, check mark, Trump, X. Don't panic before the picture of your entire life. Don't dwell on all the troubles you've faced or have yet to face, but instead ask yourself as each trouble comes, what is so unbearable or unmanageable in this? Your reply will embarrass you. Then remind yourself that it's not the future or the past that bears down on you, but only the present, always the present, which becomes an even smaller thing when isolated in this way, and when the mind cannot bear up under so slender an object is chastened. That's right. That's right. Sometimes you're in such stressful periods of your life. I think back last spring, very stressful. My former supervisor had recently retired, so I was taking on the responsibilities of her job with my incumbent duties as well. I was in the midst of several job interviews within the university that I work, to try to get a better position. Stressful, just having to deal with those, especially Zoom interviews. Oh, terrible. And also at the same time, I was, it was towards the end of the graduate course that I was taking for that semester. And of course, with being a dad and being a husband, all these things, and then working full time, all these things, I was so stressful. But you have to chunk. You have to chunk things. You can't you can't think of everything that you have to do right now. You got to just prioritize, think, what do I have to do now? And then you do that one thing now. When that's over, you say, okay, what do I have to do next? Then you do that next thing next. As a distance runner, when you're going on I ran 4 miles today. Especially when you're going up a hill. If you look at that whole hill and you try to take it all in your mind when you're at the bottom, you're probably not going to make it to the top without walking. But if you're able to properly chunk, like you just tell yourself, I'm going to run to that mailbox. You get to that mailbox and then you find another landmark. I'm going to run to that crack in the blacktop. You run to that crack in the blacktop. And then I'm going to run to that cow. Then you run to that cow. And before you know it, by properly chunking it, you've made it to the top. And you probably made it to the top faster than you would have if you were thinking about the whole hill as one. What fails to reflect the light deprives itself of light. That's good. I love this analogy. Right? Because anything that is lit up, it's going to reflect that light, right? You can't be the receiver of light and not reflect it. And if you don't reflect it, well, then by reverse thinking, if you're not reflecting it, then you're not receiving it. Almost done here. We're closing in on it. How short is the span between birth and death? How bottomless the abyss before birth, and boundless the gulf after death. Right? It's important to be humble. In the grand scheme of time, in the grand scheme of eternity, we live maybe 120 years at the most. And that's very rare. But yet what we do can have a huge impact on the future. And so we should be careful and wise in our steps, especially if we're a person in authority, able to change things in society. I'm thinking of the woke movement, how what they're doing now is going to echo down through the generations, potentially for centuries, in our society in a very detrimental manner. So we should be humble. We should make sure that what we're doing is righteous and good, and it'll have good turnover and good ripple effects throughout the decades and centuries. And also in considering the expanse of eternity behind us in the past. We should be humble to the wisdom that it contains, that we are receivers of the wisdom of our forebears, of our ancestors. We should not say, oh, those old fogies, they didn't know what they're talking about. No. They were human just like us. They might have had different problems, but we should learn and keep our ear. We should have ears to listen to what they had to say and to how they reacted to events. We should not have the hubris that even though the only time we have is now, like anybody, we should not have the hubris to think, oh, we know better than them, and we are the progenitors of everything that's going to come after us. That is the height of hubris. What's so bad or surprising about the ignoramus? I like that they translated it that way. What's so bad or surprising about the ignoramus who acts out of ignorance? Find fault instead with yourself for failing to anticipate his offensive behavior. All you people who engage on social media, this is for you and also for me. Your ability to reason should have told you that he would misbehave, but you refuse to listen and are now shocked by his misbehavior. Yes. This is a reprimand to me, to myself. Every now and then, I always try to engage online with wisdom and with grace. But sometimes I get myself in too thick. Now, it's not because I don't go out with anger. I'm very careful not to be angry. But sometimes, you get yourself in a situation where you're being trolled from all sides. And it gets to a point to where, oh, I'm throwing my pearls to the swine. That's what this has come to. Your intentions were good, but you failed to have the foresight of what it was probably going to devolve into. And then sometimes I just go ghost the thread or the conversation because it becomes so toxic that there's no point in it anymore. So to try to anticipate those times and to avoid them is the best way. Of course, you can't always anticipate all of them, but I think I can do better, and we can all do better. This one here is quite convicting. Bear in mind that your hermitage goes wherever you go. The good life is the same here as it is in the mountains or by the sea. Yep, that's right. That means we can take what he was talking about. We can take a vacation anywhere, anytime we like. Our hermitage is within us. Whenever anything is hindered, its condition deteriorates and becomes worse. Whereas a man actually becomes better and more praiseworthy when he overcomes what hinders him through the use of reason. This just points out the power of perseverance, steadfastness, and long-suffering. Right? Important qualities for human development, for the growth of virtue and understanding. And it takes years. It takes years to really harness these. I mean, I'm 41 now, and I'm really just starting to get a grasp on this. On long suffering, steadfastness, and perseverance. I mean, when you're young, you know what they are, and you have experiences with them, to be sure, to varying degrees, depending on the person. But with age, you definitely come to understand these qualities and the importance of these virtues. Suffering. If there's no suffering, then there's no growth. If we're not pruned, we're not going to grow properly. We're going to die. That's not to say that we should seek out suffering. But that is to say that when suffering comes of its own accord, we should endure it well and with wisdom. Fifth, you have no proof that they are doing anything wrong. Many things are done for reasons that are not apparent. A man must know a great deal before condemning another man's behavior. This puts me in mind of the plank eye, right? Don't presume to take a splinter out of your neighbor's eye whenever you have a plank in your own eye. This should not scare us away from admonishing other people or from encouraging other people to do better. We should, if we see a brother in sin, we should confront that brother. We should talk to them one-on-one, at least at first, and out with love and understanding and genuine concern. So let's not shy away from that, but at the same time, let's go into that with an open mind, that maybe we don't have the full story. Maybe we don't have the full story. Maybe our understanding as to what is right or wrong is a little bit off. Maybe what is truly an adiaphora, like a gray area in the Bible. Maybe we are a little bit too legalistic ourselves about that. Or perhaps that person is a little bit too latitudinarian about something that is a clearly black and white. Or perhaps it is a black and white area indeed, but the way they go about it is making that what would otherwise be an adiaphoric topic, an adiaphoric area, into a clearly sinful area. But we have to go into that discussion with that brother that we're trying to admonish and encourage and love with that kind of attitude, that we may not have the full story, right? A man must know a great deal before condemning another man's behavior. It's true. A lot of factors going into that. Last one. Often I marvel at how men love themselves more than others, while at the same time caring more about what others think of them than what they think of themselves. That's right. It's the self-God complex. We love ourselves as gods. Others be damned. But when it comes to prestige and social consideration and opinion, we care what other people think about us instead of holding to what we think about ourselves in the truth and the light of God's Word. All right. Those are some of my rambling thoughts and commentaries and bunny trails and cries of outrage from Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, and this is the Emperor's Handbook, a new translation by C. Scott Hicks and David V. Hicks. I recommend you pick it up. Those are just some of the kernels that I enjoyed that I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of the Peregrine Prude. I do not know how often I will make these videos. This was quite long, I'm sure. They probably will be this long every time, but not always. Maybe sometimes longer. Who knows? All right. Bye.